All right, what up, guys? We are live. We got a special guest in the house, C.S. Joseph. So I didn't even tell you this. So this started. I learned about you when random guy, DM me on Instagram, and that happens to be pretty often. People are like, yo, you should get this person on. But I don't remember exactly what he said, but he made such a strong case. I was like, sold. Give me his number. Do you know who that person is? That I,
It's Kevin. Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Is he like a
yeah,
friend of yours or a supporter? Or
yeah. He's been in my community for like a while, and he just DMs me randomly, and it's like, "Hey, man, you need to be on Alice's show, like now. Like, get on Alice's show." Like, okay, sure. Set it up. I just told him, just fucking set it up. So I'm
I
like,
don't, I don't
hey,
remember the
here
exact
we
words
are.
he used. I just know he made such a strong argument that I didn't even ask follow-up questions. I was like, all right, sure, shoot me his number. But yeah, do you want to just give an introduction about yourself for my audience, for anyone who's not familiar with you?
Yeah. So like, okay, yeah. So I'm C.S. Joseph. I am infamous, more than famous, actually. I'm infamous for being, and this is other people making this claim, the world's foremost expert in Jungian analytical psychology, where I psychoanalyze people rapid, quick, and I could just like get in their heads, like worse than a fucking mentalist. Like I'm that guy with like a street sign that says "Epic Street Psychic." I interview random chicks on the side of the road or whatever for my show, and they're like, "Oh my god, you're such a great psychic" or whatever, because I can get in their heads like super fucking quick. And then I'm like, "No, actually, I'm a psychologist," and it's just hilarious as fuck. That's like the first thing. Also, I run a nonprofit that rehabilitates men into their masculine and also women into their feminine. I teach women how to be women. It's kind of interesting. I teach men how to be men, which is also interesting. And basically, what I do for a living is I optimize literally everyone's relationships, while also I'm a polygynist, which is probably the number one thing that causes people to hate my guts. At first, it was apparently like I don't know, sullying Carl Jung's name or something, because I basically took over the science. And right now I'm creating cutting edge AI to automate all of this shit for everyone. So that way, like when it comes to human interaction, any social interaction, you have literally every fucking tool that you need to communicate with anyone, literally anyone, for any reason at any time. And that's kind of what we're working on right now. But yeah, that's where it's at. It's funny, my audience is already trying to psychoanalyze you right now with my techniques.
We can do that. Yeah, that'd be fun. Let me ask you a few questions, and then we can get into the psychoanalysis of Alex. So you're like
Sure.
follow-up question. So you're legit. So you like got a psychiatry degree, but then you decide instead of like having like a traditional practice, you want to do something more like non-traditional type of thing, right?
Oh, hell no. No, dude, I was homeless in the streets of Seattle, and in exchange for taking care of some dude's pot grow, he taught me real street psychology, basically, and then I developed it from there. He gave me this thing called the type grid, which is basically like this fucking calculus-based array, like an abacus or whatever, from which you can rapidly calculate anyone's psyche just based on a couple of parameters, like super quick, and then also verify it using different vectors simultaneously. And I basically expanded it from there, like completely gone all out as much as I can. And it's fundamentally transformed people's lives. I have absolutely no formal education in the psychology field. All I
Oh,
did was just buy an epic fuck ton of books, read all of the books, as well as have my two mentors teach me as a result. However, the author of Energies and Patterns of Psychological Type, Dr. John Beebe, he has said publicly that he considers me a colleague, which is pretty cool. He gave me a signed copy of his book. So, I guess hashtag some credibility, but most people's most people out there think I'm just a charlatan or a fraud who doesn't actually know what they're talking about. And then like I end up having a lot of drama surrounding me all the time, hence the infamy. And then as a result of that drama, people like want to get on my channel, they want to check out my shit. And then they're like, oh, fuck that C.S. Joseph guy. He's a piece of shit. He's a charlatan or whatever. And then they actually check out the content. And they're like, okay, actually, he's fucking right. Maybe we should stick around. And it's not just psychology. Like I get really deep into gender dynamics as well, red pill related topics, black pill related topics, king warrior magician lover topics. Like we just go all out on mature masculine, mature femininity, and like expose all that bullshit. My other background is that I'm a pastor's kid and a biblical scholar because my father kind of wanted me to be a preacher, but I decided not to go in that direction. And yet all of a sudden I find myself preaching to people anyway on the internet, which is kind of funny if you think about it. But yeah, like in general, that's my background. I am literally an autodidact. So
What's an
yeah,
autodidact? I'm not familiar
an
with that subject.
autodidact. An autodidact is somebody who is ultimately self-taught without any formal
Oh, I
education, but
see.
they can be just as deadly, if not better, at it than the actual people who are formally educated. Basically, it's an
So
autodidact.
why you hated on Reddit? You mentioned that before we started. What's the controversy?
There's a lot of controversy. Basically, people complaining about how I treat women, for example, it's probably the biggest one nowadays. People complaining about how, oh, why the fuck should we take relationship advice from Mr. C.S. Joseph when he has so many failed marriages? To which I respond, because you don't learn anything from success, folks. You learn from failure, actually. But that's another criticism. Other people saying that I don't know what I'm talking about because the powers that be in the psychological space fundamentally disagree with me, but I'm literally leading a psychological revolution in a bid to end fatherlessness, because I maintain fatherlessness is the biggest disease that plagues our race on this planet, and it's literally caused by open hypergamy and all this other bullshit that a lot of people talk about. Um, you know, Even though I got to give credit to Tomassi on that work,
Oh
Mr.
God,
George. But
please,
but
not on my channel. For the love of God, I can't
the
stand
thing
that.
is, though, while I can't either. To be fair, I am not a fan of Tomassi at all for some very important ethical reasons. Actually, I have some serious issues with some of the things that he's saying. I do agree with a lot of the content of his books. However, I do not agree with his recommendations. Like, he's really good at identifying the problem, but his recommendations on how to solve the problem, I think, is dog shit, personally. So
Yeah, yeah, that sounds. I mean, I don't agree with all his descriptions, but his descriptions are much better than his prescriptions overall.
yeah, and then he claims that he doesn't make prescriptions, and then I'm like, wait a minute. Actually, the chapter called Plate Theory in Rational Male Volume 1 is a fucking prescription, dude. Like, what? Come
Did
on,
you ever
man.
watch my debate with him by chance?
I have not seen that. I'll be very interested in that. Just text me over that. Like, I'll be happy to watch that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it happened like 3 weeks ago. Okay, well let's do this. So, what's your like? I don't know. Do you need more information? How would you go about psychoanalyzing me? I'm curious what your perspective is.
Oh, I'm already done. I had you pegged within like five
Okay, okay.
seconds.
Hit me with it.
Yeah. All right, yeah. So you're like you're an individual who knows what you're thinking at all the time. In fact, you can't even stop thinking. And you're actually the smartest guy in the room typically, but you usually don't give yourself credit like that, because sometimes you can be quite self-deprecating as a result of that. The reason why is because your core fear is based on whether or not people actually like you or accept you, right? You're the smartest motherfucker around, but sometimes you end up developing Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the smart people think they're dumb and the dumb people think they're smart. But you're actually one of the smart guys that sometimes may think you're dumb, or at least you probably did in your youth and probably don't do so now. You're very aware of the moment. You live consistently in the moment, and such that you care very much about precise performance, right? Such that you want to make sure that you have something concrete to show for your efforts at the end of the day. If you don't have that, then that actually bothers the fuck out of you, because then you actually feel bad about yourself for not actually performing properly. And you end up feeling guilty for actually wasting so much time and not actually getting something fucking accomplished, because where your worry exists is based on what you accomplish, what you achieve, if you have enough credentials, if you have enough credibility. Why the fuck is anyone actually going to listen to me when everyone else is already talking about all these things at the same time, which is where your worry exists, essentially. You also, the most innocent part about you is what you want and what you desire. It's kind of like almost childish to a point, but you generally know what you want all the time, almost like a little kid. And it's like as if you have like this liquid luck about you, and you can like get through almost any situation. You find yourself in a dangerous spot, and then for some reason, by some fucking miracle, you're always able to get out of that dangerous situation at any time, because you're a very tactical individual. Not the most strategic, but very tactical. If you get into a freaking situation, you're able to get yourself out of that situation basically just as quickly as you got in. And then it's like, oh shit, that was a close call. So like you're kind of like the master of close calls, essentially, which is pretty cool. What's up, big man? So I got a 2.5-year-old in here with me right now, and he and then also here's the thing though, but like you're very critical towards your own effort, right? And sometimes you end up feeling like or thinking that you're not doing enough, right? And that's another thing that like really bothers you. So sometimes you push yourself to do a lot of effort. And so it's sometimes can seem like feast or famine between like high effort versus like no effort, right? And then but what you're unaware of the most psychologically is you're unaware of consequences. You can see immediate reactions to decisions that you make because you can bend the physical environment against against your will, or bend your will, basically bend the physical environment around it. But in terms of long-term prognostication, long-term predictions, you have a really hard time doing that. The reason why is because you can see everything that could happen, but you don't know how to prioritize it. You don't know what's the most probable. You can see, oh, infinite possibilities, but I don't know which one is most likely to occur. And that can end up blowing up in your face as well. And then the worst part about you, it's called introverted feeling demon. It's basically where you're extremely hard on yourself, like really hard on yourself, to the point where sometimes you by default believe you're not a good person unless someone else is sympathetic towards you or validating you and your ideas, and only then do you actually end up accepting that you're actually good. And so your life arc basically as a person is to try to get to a point where you are trying to reach a level of self-acceptance without anyone else's acceptance around you, essentially. And that's a huge struggle for people like you who have that issue. Also, people like you are amazing adrenaline junkies. The things that you want the most out of life: power, but also validation, so that your ideas are validated, because that helps you fight that Dunning-Kruger effect I talked about, which is the smart people thinking that they're dumb, which is a bullshit assumption in my opinion, especially because when you're in the room, you're the smartest one of the fuck in the room, because you literally can solve all the problems. And when people come to you and ask you for help, that's what really makes you happy. And the one thing that could really unlock your happiness in life is if you allow yourself to basically become a teacher, which you kind of technically are, given that you're a content creator anyway. But teaching is what really makes you happy. Helping others, especially potentially men, is really what makes you happy ultimately. And it's what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning, essentially. And if it doesn't already, it will eventually, because as you grow into what is your subconscious, and your subconscious is this big time teacher, this big time mentor, and you want to be able to mentor so many people at the same time and improve their lives, because that's basically your life's purpose, is basically improving other people and solving problems, essentially. So yeah, that's just a nutshell.
Yeah, I took some notes. I think you got about 70% of it correct, 70, 75. Okay, so I didn't write down all the things I agree with you on, but I think you kind of saw me nodding when you hit on something that I thought was accurate. Okay, so I'll just go through the list. I think it's like 5 or 6 things that I don't agree with. Number one, I don't care about credentials. I've never cared about credentials. I've often made the argument that like college doesn't make you any smarter, and yeah, I've never given a shit about.
Okay, then if you've never cared about credentials, then what I would say in response to that is that while you may not care about credentials for yourself, you may worry about whether or not other people are credentialed or at least qualified to say what they say, which is also another expression of that. So that might be the alternative to that one.
Qualified in the sense that they have the knowledge and experience, not so much that they went to the proper university or whatever.
Yeah, you're like my cousin who's like, "Oh, Chase, it's really nice that you read that book, but where's your life experience to back it up, bro? Like, I'm not going to listen to some fucking book that you read and you're going to tell me all about it if I don't see you actually living the contents of that book and that you're getting success from that book. So shut the fuck up." Like, that's his reaction.
Yeah. If we change it to that, sure. Okay, so then the second one's probably a bigger one that I disagree with. I used to care about being liked when I was younger. That was actually a huge thing for me. But it hasn't been like that in almost a decade. I don't care about being liked. I really don't. Unless it's people I'm close to. It is important to me
maturity, man.
I'm close to, but I don't care if like random people like me or not. It's never mattered to me. I've never really sucked. I've never really been seeking that validation. Power, yes, I think you hit the nail on that one, but I think that's a lot of people. Validation, not so much. Power is not my only though goal, or not my only motivator. I do legitimately believe in the stuff I believe and say, and I do like having an impact and influence. But power is definitely part of it for sure. Money has never been part of it. I would say that.
Same.
I would say that I'm pretty good at long-term predictions. I would say I made mistakes, of course, but I wouldn't say I'm bad at long-term predictions. And probably the biggest thing I would disagree with is I never ever believe I'm not a good person. I always believe I'm a good person, no matter what happens, or at least it's been like that for the last like decade or so. So that one I would say I totally disagree with. I wouldn't also say
Well,
teaching.
how old are you?
I'm 34.
Oh, okay, so that makes a lot of sense because my description is like match like typically someone who's more closer to the youth, but I also work with tons of people who are much younger than me. I mean, I've only met a few people in my audience who are actually younger than me because I'm like 37, so it's like, you know, it's very rare that I find someone in my community who's older than me. So that's
Yeah,
fair.
but yeah, no, I definitely don't think that I ever believe I'm not a good person. I would say that I wouldn't say teaching makes me like the happiest. I enjoy it, but it's not my main motivator. I would say my main motivator, like I said, is probably influence and power, and just being able to share the things that I am extremely convinced of, whether that's dating related, gender dynamics related, politics related, life health related, whatever. I just legitimately am like convicted. Well, not everything.
The things that matter.
Yeah,
Let's be
the things
honest.
that I feel like I'm knowledgeable about. Like, there's obviously things that like I don't have strong positions on. Like, you want to talk like astrophysics or whatever. Like, I'm not gonna like really have a strong position. But yeah, the things that are like relevant to me are the things that I focus on. But yeah, I'd say like solid like 70% or so. You hit the nail on the head. What's your process for doing these analysis?
Uh, basically, like what I told you, that type grid, essentially. I have the entire thing memorized and I've been doing it for 16 years. And it's just like boom, 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 boom. And that's just off of an initial impression. Like if I have a 20-minute conversation, it makes it easier to just like, go down even further. I mostly have this like people like pay me like hundreds of dollars for like a session just to be able to uh, have me psychoanalyze them essentially, and then I give them the resources and the advice how they can improve their lives, just from that perspective. And then also tell them, like if it's men, it's like, hey, here's the women that is most compatible with you, and here's where you find them. Here's how you have a relationship with them, that kind of a thing.
Hold that
Or
thought 1 second. Did you find your keys, babe? Yeah. Okay, good. Love you. Sorry, keep going.
yeah. So but yeah, it just optimizing people's relationships in terms of compatibility. Like the study of the psychology is necessary to even determine compatibility at all. It's so funny because my wife was doing the same thing earlier. Just
Interesting. So what? Okay, so you mentioned earlier about Tomassi's content that you agree with some of his descriptions. What are the descriptions you agree with?
I agree with him in terms of his description of hypergamy, alpha versus beta traits. I think that's absolutely true. It's even biblical, actually. It's in the Book of Genesis, which a lot of people are like, "What the hell?" I'm like, "Yeah," because I'm one of the few people that maintains that Eve actually had sex with the serpent. Because don't touch the forbidden fruit. The word "touch" has a sexual connotation to it, so it's actually like poetic like that. So like Eve had sex with the serpent, he was her alpha flux, and then she had sex with Adam, and he's her beta bucks, basically. So we have hypergamy right there in the Book of Genesis, which a lot of people don't even realize that's a thing. And my biblical scholar coming out. And then so yeah, I agree with him on that standpoint. I agree with him on frame being everything, iron rule of Tomassi one, as he claims. I agree with him on that. I also agree with some of his predictions about open hypergamy ultimately leading to the destruction of society, etc. I agree with him on that, and it's so funny because he called out Neil Strauss at the end, at the final chapter of the game that Neil Strauss actually wrote, and stating that he saw that prediction and then added his own prediction. So I agree with him there. What I disagree with him actually on is plate theory. I entirely disagree with him on plate theory, big time.
Okay, you touched on a small part of Rolo Tomassi. I agree with frame being everything, so I'll just remove that from my list. Hypergamy. So, okay, let me ask you a follow-up question. So, do you believe in the dual meaning hypothesis then?
The dual meaning hypothesis, could you explain that?
Yeah, sure. It's the idea that a girl, for example, will settle down with a beta guy and then she will cheat on him with an alpha guy.
Yeah,
That's kind of what I
definitely. But
think hypergamy is based
the
on.
thing is, though, I think it goes both ways because I've seen men that I would consider alpha and then being cheated on for the sake of betas because they were not able to provide for the safety or the security needed by that particular woman.
But if it
I've
goes
seen that
both
happen many
ways, then
times.
that disproves hypergamy, doesn't it?
If it just go, no, because how I define hypergamy is that women put men into two separate categories: men who primarily specialize in beta traits, and men who primarily specialize in alpha traits. And when it comes to, like, for example, if it really is true that 20% of the population specializes in alpha traits and 80% of the population specializes in beta traits, one Pareto, like if that's actually true, which I can accept, given, evolution, trying to make sure that the longevity and survival of the race is, like, moving forward. If that is true, then I would imagine rites of passage that were established by cultures throughout time would have made sure that both sets of traits go from natural behavior plus learned behavior. So theoretically speaking, I maintain that a man starts off with his natural traits, and he's naturally beta or he's naturally alpha, and then he has to use learned behavior to be able to produce the other traits at the same time. That way, towards by the time he's in his prime, which is 35 plus, he's able to actually be able to produce both sets of traits simultaneously. And I maintain men of old, before the men of the day, because of fatherlessness, were actually able to produce and fulfill both sides of a woman's hypergamy. I also maintain that men put women into two categories as well, with their sexual strategy, which is polygyny.
I think Rolo and most people in the Red Pill use a different definition of hypergamy. Their definition is that women have a biological tendency to trade up. That's how Rolo and, like, pretty much everyone else defines it.
Yeah, well, yes. Then I would have to disagree with them on that, because women only trade up if they feel the need to trade up. And what trading up is basically, I'm going to go get the needs that I don't have fulfilled over there, even though that person may not have the whole thing, and then I'm just going to get it. But if a man basically is able to do both simultaneously, because he has the natural behavior and the learned behavior simultaneously from a psychological perspective, and also due to life experience, etc., then sure, she's not going to cheat on him. That's
all right. We made progress. You no longer believe in hypergamy, or at least not the way the Rolo defines it. Yeah, your definition. Your definition is, like, very, very. I've never heard this definition before. I'm not saying it's a bad definition. If what you said, I largely agree with. I've debated Rolo, and I've watched this shit, and I've debated a lot of red pillars, and they use the trading up definition. When you were talking about kind of as more of the mate switching hypothesis, are you familiar with that at all, or no?
Mate switching hypothesis. Go ahead and define it for me.
This is nerdy, like really red pill shit. Yeah. The only reason I know this.
Let's get nerdy, man. I'm cool.
So first there was the dual mate hypothesis, which is what Rolo's work is based on, which is basically, again, like I said, is the idea that women settle down with betas and they cheat on them with alphas, right? But then a lot of the people who pioneered the dual mating hypothesis were like, wait, actually, there's not really enough evidence for this. So they switched to the mate switching hypothesis, which just suggests that women, basically kind of what you said, will switch from one mate to another because there's something that they're missing in their relationship, primarily because they're dissatisfied, something to do with the relationship. So it's not that the guy is higher value or more alpha or more beta. It's just that they're switching from one guy to another guy. So they're not, like, majority of the time, they're not like sell down the beta, but having kids with alpha, which is what the dual mating hypothesis would imply.
Right. I maintain that if a man is able to provide both sides and satisfy both sides of women's hypergamy based on the definition that I provided you, that won't happen.
Yeah, sure. I don't necessarily disagree. What are some other? I mean, we agree on the frame thing. What are some other things you would agree with Rolo's descriptions on?
Let's see here. Chapter 1 of the Rational Male, in terms of getting rid of one-itis, I think is the most critical piece of information that he actually puts forward, and probably, and I think chapter 1 is like the most important thing, period, that he ever wrote. Frame is everything is probably the second thing, I would say, in that. And I enjoyed preventive medicine because it's more like about, like, okay, what do you do when you're married versus positive masculinity, which is the third book. Is more about what you do when, like, you're a father, essentially. The fourth book on religion, I gave that to my father because he's a pastor, just to troll him, and he was not pleased. And then book 5, I kind of just throw out the window entirely. I loathe book 5. I think book 5 was his weakest for sure, because it's like it's a book of prescriptions, even though he claims to not give prescriptions at all, which I find ridiculous.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just tell you my disagreements. You can tell me. So,
Sure.
uh, okay. So I disagree with this concept of the wall. Uh, I
Oh,
just, yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with the
Well,
wall.
what's your idea? Because we might be again talking about different things. What's your idea of the wall? At least as how
Sure,
he
sure.
says it.
Yeah. So, in terms of how he says it, um, basically that moment where it's like the leftover woman, which is like the Far East, the Chinese, Korean, Japanese way of saying it. Basically, it's a Far East cultural thing where the leftover woman, the woman who is gone beyond being a spinster or a thornback, basically, and is, or they start off as old maid and then they become a spinster, then become a thornback, basically as they age and they're single or whatever. And at that point, they're in their early 30s and they're not really in a situation to be able to be tantalizing enough on the sexual marketplace. For example, I know a woman who cheated on a man when she was 26 years old, and she decided to cheat, and then she became a single mother. And talking about, and when she first met this man, she's like, oh, really chubby girl, and then he turned her into basically like Victoria's Secret model physique, essentially, like super gorgeous woman. Helped her measure her food, took her to the gym, all these types of different things. She had a child with him, etc. And ultimately, she cheats on him with a different guy that she was working with, essentially, and claiming that it'll be all good. Well, after 3 months of being in that relationship with the guy that she cheated on her husband, and then he divorced her on the spot after that, she comes to find out that he was seeing other girls on the side, and basically admitted to her that you're just side action, essentially. And she thought for sure that they were going to be in a relationship. And ever since that time, and it's been over a year now for this woman to have this happen. She has not been able to secure the commitment of any man as a 27-year-old smoking hot exotic woman who has a child, and no man is willing to commit to her. So basically, I talk about, we talk about the female sexual strategy of hypergamy. There's the male sexual strategy of polygyny, where men are putting women in two separate categories. And that's basically women that you fuck and women that you marry, basically women that you commit to versus women that you just have sex with, essentially. And she is basically in sex only category perpetually. And so women who end up being in sex only category over time, being used and abused, their value is going down in the sexual marketplace. And then as a result of that, they're not even actually able to gain the commitment of men. So what I maintain is that the wall is essentially a point in time in a woman's life where she's actually statistically less likely to be able to compete in the sexual marketplace. So I do agree with Rolo in terms of like epiphany phase, transition phase, security phase, development phase, etc. I agree with him there, as a result, as a general structure for being able to describe, what that is. So
Yeah, but here's the follow up question: what would that age be?
see, that's where it gets interesting. And if you look at statistics in terms of like the average age that a woman marries in Western society, it's technically 29, and it still is today the average age. Although in Europe, it's kind of going up to like age 31 for the most part. Uh, so I would say it would be slightly after the average age that women in Western society are getting married currently, is
Yeah,
what the wall would be.
Yeah, I would just say that's like a overly simplistic and probably overly reductionist way of looking at it, because it's a sliding scale. Because the older you get,
Sure.
the less competitive you are. So it's like it shouldn't be the wall; it should be the sliding scale if you want to actually be accurate about it. Because there's no real age. Like, what is there really a difference between a woman
I
who's 30
agree.
and 35? Is there really a difference between a woman who's 35 and 40? It's all smaller. There's not like one hard age, or not even one hard age range. It's just the
I
older
guess
you
rate
get.
of decay. I guess rate of decay on that curve, on that bell curve, basically that he has in his graph. I think rate of decay is probably uh, something that would be more useful instead of just giving an arbitrary age, right? Because like I've seen women not hit like having their epiphany phase until like 27, where I've been able to epiphany phase women at 24, where I'm like, hey, just to let you know, the day is going to come very soon where your looks are not going to be able to compete with younger girls. And what are you going to do about it? Maybe you should stop investing in your career right now and instead actually invest in becoming a really good feminine woman who's worthy of a high value man. Why don't you do that instead? And I do that in my coaching practice consistently.
Um, yeah, but like again, just the whole concept of the wall being like, do you think it's a physical or a mental thing? The wall.
I think it's a physical thing because the way sexuality works. Because uh, think about it like I have this model called the sexuality Ouroboros, basically. So you have male sexuality is turned on by looking at a woman, and then that sparks his nature to take action, and then his nurture actually performs the action, and then her nurture receives his action, basically, which then turns on her nature, and then based on the response of her nature, then that opens up her sexuality. So it begins with male sexuality, but it ends with female sexuality in that entire Ouroboros, essentially. So it just goes through those phases, and that's why it's so hard for a woman to ultimately be turned on by a man, because you have a lot of those steps to get through. Now, that doesn't say that a man could not like rapidly get through them. The higher value he is, of course he could, but at the end of the day, it's still a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through. In the same way, a sperm has a lot of hoops to jump through to get to that egg.
Well, it depends on the woman. Like the amount of hoops will depend on the woman. Some women have very little hoops, and some women have a lot of hoops, and most women are somewhere in the middle. But yeah, like okay, sure, I would agree. It's probably would be more of a physical
I
thing,
think that's contextual, though.
but
Like
I
that's
think
very
like,
contextual.
I think like the big thing is though also like people age differently. There's some 40-year-old women who look hot as fuck, who look like they're
Agreed.
32, and there's some 40-year-old women who look like they're 52, right? Like those cannot
Sure.
be in the same category. And also obviously where you
But I can't
live.
have children with them. I can't have children with them, or maybe I could have children with them, but they're probably more likely to be not as healthy. Not only that, like if
But
I'm
is that
going
like a
to,
like? But then, are we assuming that like a woman who's like past menopause is going to have a really hard time finding a mate? Because like I've just done too many of these Tinder experiments where I've created a profile for like a 65-year-old chick, and there's hundreds of guys who are interested in going out with her. So I'm just like not convinced that even if she's post menopause, I understand
because
that
that's
she'll
sex
have.
only category. It's not commitment. I mean, it depends on what side of the male sexual strategy you're talking about. Are you talking about sex only category, or are you talking about women that you commit to? Because
But
I don't
there's
think any of those men are going to commit to that.
but there's so many women who like for example get divorced when they're like 50 or something and they find another person and they spend the rest of their life with them. Like I've just seen too many counter examples of that as well, where they
Sure,
like yeah,
I don't know
55-year-old
if
guy,
it's
50-year-old woman, and
common.
then they remarry. Yeah.
I don't know if it's common because you still have that like one stat. You have that one stat where the majority of working age women from ages 18 to 40 are going to be alone by 2030. Like there's something to be said about that. That's basically men's polygynous sexual strategy engaging in just sex only categorizing most women anyway. Because like for example, like what do men actually get out of being in a relationship with a woman? Like nowadays they can't have their virgins, they can't have women who are actually healthy and physically attractive because most of them are fat in the United States of America, for example. So they can't even have those things. And then most women are disobedient and not really submissive either. So they don't even know how to be feminine because they're not even able to actually prove their femininity by giving a man gratitude, peace, obedience, and representation. So what the hell does men even get out of having a relationship? So as a result of that, men are perfectly cool with just having sex with a girl, and then but that's all it'll ever be. It's not going to be more, even though the girl is like imagining to herself that it will be more than that, and then that's not the case. And I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying this is just a natural cause of the environment that we live in within Western society. I think it's toxic, but at the same time, there's not really much we can do about that because due to fatherlessness, everyone is toxic. And in these days, given that women are solipsistic, another thing I agree with Rolo on is that due to female solipsism and male idealism, we find ourselves in a situation where the solipsism of women is entirely enabled, whereas the idealism of men is entirely taken advantage of.
Yeah, but most like the majority of people are not fatherless. Like, let me see. 1 in 4 children in the United States live without a biological step or adoptive father in the home. So 3 out of 4 people do have a father.
Well, it depends
So
how we define fatherless. Depends on how we define fatherless. Like for example, I when I was 18, I didn't even know how to do basic tasks for adulthood. Yet my mother and my father have been together this whole time. Like absent fathers come in many forms. They could actually be physically absent from the home, but they can also be like absent mentally, or they could be spending too much time on the fucking Xbox instead of actually like raising children. You see what I'm saying? Like, fatherlessness is also just about poor performance in fathers, in as much as it is also about actually being absent.
Okay,
But the
so
biggest
we're just
thing,
using the word fatherless like totally different, because when I hear someone say fatherless, I think like the father is like physically not there. He's either dead or he's moved on
sure,
or he's not there. But
we are using it differently.
you're talking about poor parenting, which I agree is much more common
Yeah,
than just
but
fatherless.
25% of the population without the father actually be present is actually extremely dangerous just on its own, because you have a 1 in 4 chance of meeting someone who's basically underparented, which I would say that's much higher because the performance of parenting is terrible. Because, for example, economically speaking, right now within the United States of America, the old statistic is 2 incomes. I would say it's probably about 2.4 to 2.6 incomes right now is required to even facilitate a family. Whereas in the 1950s, you could have 1 income, one wife, 2 children, one car, and one house on 1 income. Versus today, you can't do that. It's about 2.4 to 2.6 incomes per household to even have children. And then those children are raised by the state, okay, or daycare, which is the state because of state mandates and state education mandates. And then also ultimately public school, also the state and raised by the state instead of raised by children. It's kind of hard to start a revolution if the children are not raised by parents who may actually disagree with the government. Just saying. So as a result of that, fatherlessness ends up becoming a problem. So people are in general, millennials and younger, have been raised by the state, and as a result of that, they have state-like values instead of family values. And we continue to see this over and over and over, like Star Wars Acolyte. Like what a fucking shit show of a show that was. You know what I'm saying? Like if we're gonna go nerd out here, like
I started
uh,
off agreeing with you, but I think we're going to get into political disagreement, because I do agree with you that, yeah, obviously there's a massive wealth gap that's gotten a lot worse. Like the middle class was much stronger in the 50s and 60s, and it's gotten smaller and smaller every year. Now you have the ultra rich, and then you have pretty much everyone else, and even the middle class, upper middle class, they can't afford on one income to support a family. So that's all true. You can blame largely the right on that. But then, yeah, if we go into like, are they raised by the state? Like, what would
I
that mean?
mean,
Like, we've always had like public education, or at least for in the 1900s. Like, in the 50s, we had public education. Like, what's changed?
what's changed? I mean, Common Core, for example, Common Core wasn't around in the 50s. Common Core is absolutely terrible.
What is
For
Common
example,
Core?
Common Core is currently the standard educational, the standard for education within public schools.
What does that
And
consist of? Like,
uh, basically, in general, teaches a different way of thinking, such that it's like a precursor to what leads to what many in the right would call wokeness, essentially.
what is
Uh,
that way of like teaching?
um, the way of teaching.
Like, well, yeah, give me a concrete.
It's not the traditional stuff that most millennials grew up with, basically. It was
I,
introduced after millennials graduated high school.
But what exactly are the teachers doing? Because I've heard this argument from the right before. It's like something is different now, but like I haven't seen any concrete examples. Like, what is like? I'm sure there are some fringe teachers out there that teach their students weird shit, but on average, in terms of the core curriculum, like what's different? We're still being taught history,
Well,
social studies, math, like fucking writing. Like, what is the big difference between the
I mean, are
education?
they really being taught history? I mean, you can make an argument they're being taught propaganda, actually, from a historical perspective. I mean, like, no one talks about how, like, like, some people make the claim that Martin Luther King, for example, was a pedophile. I don't know if that's true or not. But, like, the thing is that, like, when you come down to, like, what's generally accepted, socially acceptable history, we shouldn't allow ourselves to be credulous. You see what I'm saying? Like,
But why would you
and
teach a
what
bunch
I
of middle schoolers that MLK, who's like a transformative like figure in terms of at least race stuff, was a pedophile? Like, even if that is true, I don't think it is true. By the way, I've never seen any evidence for that. But like, why would you even teach them that? Like, his impact on the world, he's like long dead. His impact on the world is
well,
just
sure.
civil rights, and not like so much his like sex life.
Well, sure, but here's the thing: you could also make a similar example about Malcolm X, because oftentimes Malcolm X is entirely derided and just shat on in general, versus MLK is ultimately worshipped. But Malcolm X basically took a pragmatic approach to what he was doing, whereas MLK took an affiliative approach. Affiliativeness is all about like going along with the collective, hey, it's all about the team, man. It's all about the team. Whereas the pragmatic approach is all about independence and freedom, which is ultimately what Malcolm X was trying to do.
Yeah,
You
but
see
you
what
know
I'm
the big
saying?
difference between Malcolm X and MLK in terms of why one is spoken of more positively than the other? It has to do with violence. MLK believed in civil disobedience and nonviolence. What's his name? Malcolm X did believe in violence. That's the big difference. That's why people speak so much more fondly of MLK.
Well, yeah, but they're also conditioned to do so. I mean, like the thing is like just like people are conditioned to say great things about Steve Jobs, even though he was hella abusive. You know,
Yeah, sure.
so
That's like the big difference. That's like the big reason that why like MLK is remembered more positively than Malcolm X is just because it has to do with their
I just
methodology.
maintain there's a bias, and I maintain that the school education system currently now is biased. As to whether or not that's right wing or left wing, I don't give a shit because that's just arbitrary to me.
But like, how is it biased though? Like, can you give me like a specific example besides like the MLK is a pedophile thing?
Um, no, but like there is some things like for example, like I'd have to deal with my son like bringing home like his math homework and whatnot, and it's like it's entirely different than like how I was taught how to do it. You know, where you actually like put a line and like a plus there. You know, put all the numbers and you follow that number manipulation process to be able to come up with particular conclusions. And it's not really until you get into like algebra, for the most part, or at least a second level algebra, that you get out of that crap and they actually start getting down to the raw equations instead of like doing this consistent story problem crap, which actually ends up slowing down the learning process.
Are you saying your
That
son is
too.
like not taught basic mathematics in math? Like, how's that? Is that the claim or?
No, it's more like that. I maintain how Common Core is teaching children mathematics is inferior to the traditional way from like when I was in school. That's what I'm saying.
But what's the difference between mathematics now and mathematics? What is mathematics has always been mathematics. Like not much has changed in the last 50 years in terms of mathematics. What is like? Give me like a specific example of the traditional way of doing mathematics versus the way mathematics is done now.
Well, when you're taking a test, for example, and you only have story problems, and you have to instead of just being given a test where you just see the problems there, where it's like, what is 2 times 2, and then it has 2 times 2, like what is it equals? Write it in, show your work, etc. They don't do that anymore. They don't do it anymore. Like it's
What?
the child
Really?
has to. Yeah, they really don't do that.
I'm having a really hard time imagining. Like, what grade are we talking about? Is your son like 7 years old? Maybe that would be the explanation for that.
Maybe that is. I don't know. I don't have enough experience. But then
Yeah, if
again,
he's
like
if he's
here's
super
the
young,
thing.
that would
How can
explain that. I'm assuming when he
but
gets to middle school, that won't be happening.
my question ends up being though, like at what point my question is that like at what point do we realize that parents now are far less involved in their children's education, especially fathers statistically, than they were at the time like you and I were going to school and whatnot. Like I graduated high school in 2005, right? And even then, like that was still a wash versus like when my father graduated high school, his father was hella involved in his education. Of course, he had a lot more time to do so. Nowadays, people can barely afford to eat and much less pay rent. And because they can't afford, because no one can get a freaking mortgage anymore, and no one even gets mortgages anymore. Not even the rich; they don't get mortgages. So it's like okay, what do you do? So is the mortgage thing just only a middle class thing? But I'm like going off
Yeah,
topic
you,
here.
you-
But the
you're
point is,
correct. Yeah, you're correct that parents are less involved now. But I think that's goes back to your earlier point, which is that people now, both the mom, the dad, have to work 2.5 jobs, like you said. They're not. It's not like just
they
one
don't have
person.
time.
One person. Yeah, exactly. They don't have the time. But that's a you can blame the right wing economics largely on that. Like for example, gutting unions, right, which is why the middle class is so much weaker and makes a lot less money now. If you count for inflation, they did like 40 years ago, right?
And here I thought it was just printing money, but excuse me.
Well, that's the big part of that would be like trickle down economics and like George Bush economics and Trump economics. I mean, the left definitely definitely has a lot of guilt on their hands too. Like Bill Clinton definitely also propagated a lot of this bullshit economic theories. But we saw like a very strong middle class in the 60s and 70s. We saw very strong unions in the 60s and 70s, right? And now we're kind of reverting back to what we had in the 1920s, which is we had like a really, really strong like top 1% class, and then the middle class was like largely fucked. It's not obviously not nearly as bad as it was in the 1920s, not even close, but that's like the swing that we're seeing. But that's just, again, that's an economic issue, is that if you get to a point where like middle class is able to, like, where one person is able to make enough money to sustain a family, if they're in the middle class, then you would have parents helping out with their kids more, right?
I mean, yeah, sure, but in terms of like cause and effect, I'm not really sure what that would be. I can more maybe point out to what it isn't, but I couldn't say what it is.
I mean,
But
to
the
me,
thing is that like I maintain the Federal Reserve like operates with impunity and prints money, regardless if the left or the right is leading the United States of America anyway. So
um,
I don't think the president of the United States has any remote authority whatsoever over people like Ben Bernanke or Alan Greenspan or any of those people whatsoever. I don't think they have any authority over those
well, I think
people.
the
And they can
president
just do whatever they
appoints.
want.
I think the president appoints the Treasury Secretary, right, or the head of the Fed, right? I believe that's the president that makes that appointment. I could be wrong on that.
I don't know, but at
Let
the
me-
end of the day, like it's no different than like appointing judges because like judges have absolute power anyway. So, but yeah, sure, like yeah, there's a wealth gap, but I'm not here to
yeah,
really like
I
discuss
was correct.
who's to blame because I don't
It's
care
yeah,
who's to blame. I
it's the
just know it can
president that
change.
appoints the head of the Fed, which makes them less insulated than like Supreme Court justices, who once they're appointed, they're there for life. Versus like the head of the Fed can be removed. But that's a side point. Although I'm not convinced that I understand there's problems with the Fed and the current way we print money. Although I'm not convinced that's the crux of the issue in terms of economics. Like, for example,
What
inflation.
about food inflation? Well, inflation comes basically as a result of what they call quantitative easing. I mean, just in the Trump administration alone, like the majority, like what is it, 70% of the money in circulation was actually printed during his administration, for example, and then culminated with his absolute failure for Operation Warp Speed at the same time. I think that I mean that could say a lot about the Trump administration as a result. But the thing is, though, is that like the printing of money has just gotten worse. And then when in the Biden administration, I believe the actual amount of money that being printed accelerated even beyond what ended up happening, what started in the Trump administration, such that just a random layman could basically point like, okay, there's no difference because they get to do whatever they want. There's no actual oversight there. There's no actual accountability because, in my opinion, there never has been any accountability since the time of Woodrow Wilson. So who knows?
Well, inflation is largely like, for example, the recent rise in inflation was largely caused by supply chain shortages and then also corporate greed, right? So a lot of corporations took advantage of the fact that, oh, people think there's inflation, so we can raise the prices.
But how does that account for the additional quantitative easing? How does that account for that? How does that also account for the Trump administration
When you
going
say
back
quantitative
on the
easing, what do you mean exactly by that?
quantitative easing, which is the Federal Reserve printing money? Essentially, that's what they call it. Like
Okay.
just printing money to like pay debt, essentially. Like, yeah, I yeah, I mean, until someone can just explain that point to me, I just remain skeptical. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I'm definitely not an economist, so I took macro and micro in college. That's about the extent of my economic knowledge in terms of like.
I enjoyed game theory class for economics. I totally
Sure.
get it.
As far as I understand, the printing money comes off is more of a consequence rather than the cause. So you have, for example, companies raising the prices on goods due to supply chain shortages. Let's forget about corporate greed. Let's just say supply chain shortages. Let's say, for example, it's harder to get the supplies they need, so therefore there's less supply, so therefore they raise the price, right? That's what happens when you have a shortage of supply, prices go up. So then if prices go up, then the amount of money in the market is not enough, because now that 20 is worth less. So the government would print more money. I think also, obviously, the other huge part of it is that government has massive, massive amounts of debt, right? So the federal debt, so the government would have to print money to pay down what's it called? All the bond holders, foreign countries and U.S. citizens and corporations mainly that own the U.S. bonds. But if that was happening for a very long time, right? Like inflation was pretty steady up until 2020, 2021. It was about 3-4%, and then jumped up to like 10%, and now it's back to like 3%, right? But we still have the same amount of federal debt, right? The federal debt hasn't gone down, so government has always been for a while printing money. But something else has happened that caused it to go from 3% to 10%. And again, like a small part of that is the stimuluses that were passed, but it's about 20% from the breakdowns I've seen. The other 80% is, like I said, supply chain shortages and, of course, the corporate greed.
Well, how do we know that the inflation rate really is actually 3%? Because, for example, like even in the span of 1 year, it's been at least a 30% increase on my grocery bill in 1 year for the same items. And that has, like if you're looking at food, like, and if we're going to homogenize these statistics and say like everything in general is 3%, yeah, sure. But if you look at the things that actually matter, like foodstuffs, for example, if you look at what actually matters to foodstuffs, the inflation in food is entirely out of control. Sure, food has some specific supply chain issues. We had that grand solar minimum recently. We also had people burning, lots of fires. Sure, it's some natural disasters, a lot of them man-made, some of them natural, that was harming the food supply chain, absolutely, which can obviously increase inflation as a result. But in general, like no one can really afford anything that much. Like my personal buying power as an American is like at an all-time low, and it's going to just continue to become an all-time low. And and as much as people like to claim it's the left or the right whose fault it is, I think they all should burn. Because, like, for example, no one likes Trump because he's coming in and interrupting all their backroom deals, but then no one likes anyone else because of the backroom deals. So it's like, okay, what do you do?
Wait, that's not why people don't like Trump. That's not the reason, because he's interrupting the backroom. Trump is involved in a lot of these fucking backroom deals himself. Saudi Arabia.
I'm not saying
Oman.
that's wrong. What is the Saudi Arabia and Oman connection? I'm curious.
Sure. So with Saudi Arabia, for example, they're hosting their live tournament at his golf courses, right? That's not a coincidence. There's things that happen, like for example, during the Trump administration, when that journalist Khashoggi got brutally murdered, who was a U.S. resident, I believe, if not no, I don't think he was a U.S. resident, U.S. journalist for sure. They didn't even get a slap on the wrist, right? There was a bill that went through Congress that basically said that, hey, because Saudi Arabia is in war with Yemen, it's like, hey, we will not sell weapons. They're being used to basically massacre the Yemenis people. And then Trump vetoed that bill. So there was like a lot of shit that was done that was like really sketchy. Or for example, Jared Kushner got a $2 billion investment in his hedge fund, even though he had no experience doing hedge funds from Saudi Arabia. So there's like a lot of really shady, like pay to play stuff that wound up happening during the Trump administration and after. So like a lot of the stuff.
Not a fan of Kushner, that's for sure. Not a fan. Very much.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty sus. Like he got $2 billion investment.
He reminds me of Ben Shapiro.
In the hedge fund, even though he had no experience running a hedge fund because he was a real estate guy. But yeah, I mean that's not to say that Democrats aren't corrupt. But I do agree with you that purchasing power has gone down. For sure. And I mean, obviously there's like the 1% for whom like all these expenses are nothing. Like if you're making like millions of dollars a year, like 30% is nothing to you, right? It's just like whatever, it's bullshit. But for the average person, like 90% of the population, then yeah, like inflation has hit really, really hard. It doesn't really matter what the inflation is per quarter. What matters is really more overall inflation. So for example, right now inflation on average is 3%, but it doesn't really matter because inflation used to be around 10-ish%. So overall inflation from 2020 to 2024 is like 30%, right? So you are correct when you say that like shit costs 30% more. Yeah, that's the overall inflation from 2020 to 2024. It is a good thing that inflation was slowed down, but that still doesn't really help you much at this point in time when shit costs 30% more. And of course, you do have a point about how like, okay, but that's overall inflation. What are we talking about? Like essential goods, maybe the inflation there is higher. Yeah, that's definitely a problem. In terms of who to blame, I think really the biggest, if we're going to play the blame game for inflation was the shutdown. That's just what kicked a lot of this off. If Trump like stepped in and said like no government shutdowns for more than 3 weeks, you really wouldn't have this inflation issue because again, but actually, sorry, I'm going to correct myself. Yes, you would, because even though if America didn't shut down, it would be better, but other countries would have still shut down and that would have still caused supply chain issues. So yeah, it was the pandemic that was like really like at the heart of the.
Wait. I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you saying that if the U.S. government shuts down, entire other countries on this planet shut down too?
No, I'm saying that if the U.S. government doesn't shut down, then other countries would still have shut down. Which
why would they have shut down?
Because because COVID, they operate independent of the U.S. Like China and all that. Like for example, and Europe, they all shut down. Like I think if the U.S. like for example, Sweden didn't really shut down, but they didn't affect their neighbors. Norway and other countries still shut down. So if the U.S.
Sorry, I didn't realize we were talking about COVID. I thought we were talking about like
government
shutdowns because they ran out of money. That's what I thought.
No. Well, we've never really had a government, or not in any time recent history, had a government shutdown. Or at least not any kind of substantial one that I can remember. I'm just talking about the COVID shutdown, which caused all the supply chain issues. But I think also the crux of the issue there, I don't want to go like too off track, but is that also a lot of our manufacturing is outsourced to other countries. And if we had manufactured all our shit in the US, or most of our shit in the US, like we did after World War II up until like the 70s or 80s, and we did not do a shutdown, then inflation would have been like no big deal. But because we had a government shutdown, and because we get most of our shit from, or at least parts of the supply chain from other countries, that then you have inflation because you're relying on other countries. Which is why, for example, like right now, a lot of companies are actually moving from China to Mexico because they're so tired of China's zero COVID policy. Basically, if there's like someone who has COVID in like one town, the whole fucking city shuts down, and companies like Apple are just tired of it because that fucks with their production, right? So that's why all these like big companies are just moving out of China. So yeah, like that shit is like, just fuck everything up. But yeah, so a combination of outsourcing manufacturing, which has been going on for decades, due to things like NAFTA and whatnot, and just the fact that the U.S. has tax incentives that basically at least don't punish.
You're anti-NAFTA?
Not necessarily. I'm just explaining why outsourcing happened. I'm not saying there's pros to it as well. I'm not saying I'm anti-NAFTA, but I'm saying that, in the 50s, 60s, I mean, after World War II, the world was destroyed. It was just Russia and America, right? Like all the first world countries were gone or were donezo. So U.S. was by far doing all the manufacturing. Everyone was buying from the U.S. And around the 70s, 80s, it started to change. People started buying from German countries. China became a player on the scene, I believe, in the 70s or 80s. You had India that started to become a thing. So yeah, that's what happened actually.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I just kind of went on a massive tangent there about inflation and whatnot, but we can get back to.
I admire a man who's passionate in what he believes in. So.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about politics and economy and whatnot. Okay, so we talked about I think we talked about the wall. What do you think about alpha fucks, beta bucks?
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing. Like basically, parental investment, provisioning, protection for for beta traits. Alpha traits being fitness, intelligence, and basically overall selfishness, putting himself above everybody else, basically self above tribe. And beta traits being like male version of tribe of self, and then alpha traits being self above tribe from that perspective.
So you're operating. Yeah, I think you're operating on the wrong definition of alpha fucks, beta bucks. So the way Rolo has it and like all the red pillars is that kind of similar to what we discussed earlier, which is that the beta guys are essentially marrying all the girls, and the alpha guys are fucking those girls and sometimes getting them pregnant.
So, so you're saying that this is a mechanism from which men are able to like trap women through pregnancy? Is that what you're saying? Like,
no, not exactly. It's just a mating hypothesis that what the fuck is his name? I can't remember the guy's name, but that Rolo believes, which is again, like I said, that's kind of his term, is that the beta guys are the ones that are marrying the girls, and the alpha guys are the ones that are getting the girls pregnant. But the idea is that the girls want that. It's not that the guys are trapping them. It's that the girls
I think that there is some merit to that, but I don't think that's the standard for the race psychologically. I think the problem is because, like, look at it from this perspective: triple constraints analysis. You have timeline, budget, and specifications, also known as cheap, fast, or right. Pick two. You can't have all three. You can only have two of those things with the triple constraints. You can only have two of the three: cheap, fast, or right. Pick two. Now, in society, you have men, women, and society itself. You only get to pick two. And right now, it's society plus women is basically the thing in general, and men are the ones actually taking the hit. If you take society out and society ultimately collapses, then women have no choice ultimately to go back to the men essentially, and society is like acting like daddy, from this perspective. And because, just for example, why the hell would a woman actually be attracted to a man who specializes in beta traits? Why? She can get her own job, so she has her own provisioning. The illusion of police protection provides an illusion of protection, so why the hell would you want it from a man? Parental embarrassment doesn't matter because there's no longer a child rearing society, it's a child support society, so why the fuck should a woman even care about that? So beta traits are not even remotely appealing to women in general anymore, so why the fuck should they care? So as a result of that, they end up competing for alpha males, but then even beyond the alpha males, the high value men, which according to stats released by Tinder in 2020 is 4.5% of men, but I think it's probably 3.7%.
I think we have to be careful not to use Tinder as an overall analogy for how the world works, because Tinder is quite different than real world, right?
Well, I entirely agree. But oftentimes the red pillars actually look at Tinder as like an example of the microcosm of the sexual marketplace, which I disagree with that. However, the statistics do oftentimes mirror real world reality. And I mean, I got a bunch of anecdotal evidence myself to back that up. But the point is, it just gets to a point where, like, why the hell should women even care about that? Like, there's this YouTuber called Psychoanalyzes.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah,
that video about women creating a polygamous society, I found very fascinating, and that's basically as a result of them not caring about beta male traits anymore and competing for the men who have the alpha traits. Because why would a woman be attracted to a man who specializes in beta male traits when society, daddy, big brother, basically gives her those traits by default? Anyway,
I agree
now
with
society collapses, that goes away. And so then this is why I predict in the future we're going to have a very, very severe, bloody world war as a result, because of all that pent up masculinity out there, because of all of those men that are entirely ignored. And those men are actually going to end up blaming society in general and rising up against society and utterly annihilating it, which then, as a result of that, women will end up going back to men. Because, like, for example, you see all those funny memes on Instagram or TikTok talking about how, oh, there's talk of a war. All of a sudden, a woman's starting to clean in the kitchen again. You see what I'm saying? Like, just funny memes like that. But like that concept, when it comes to women, really highly value safety, and they really very much value the illusion of safety given to them by society in general, right? So as a result of that, it ends up being a bit different for most people. So I would maintain that take society completely out of the mix, or at least women's dependence on the society is the problem. This is why I support concepts like paper abortion. I think paper abortion should be illegal, should be legal. Excuse me. Paper abortion should absolutely be legal. And while I will admit I am a pro-lifer, the thing is that, like, okay, come on, like, let's be pragmatic here. Is that even like sustainable or even doable in the society? No, it's not. So as a result of that, my compromise or recommendation that I would say is paper abortion, which, like, people like Dave Chappelle heavily support paper abortion. There's like a Wikipedia article on how it actually works if you want to look it up super quick. But basically, paper abortion is the idea that in the same window a woman has the right to abort a child, a man can also write a legal affidavit saying that he's absolved of all custodial, financial, parental responsibility towards that child at the same time, which would then, if men actually had that legal right in this country, that would basically force women to be extra careful about their sexual choices, versus currently they don't have to actually. They have so much support, such a support structure from society, that there isn't really as many consequences to women in general, with their hypergamy. And that's one of the concerns that I have, and I think it's contributing heavily to fatherlessness.
Okay, you said so much here. Okay, where do I even begin? I do agree that World War III is definitely possible, but I would say it's not because of some incel revolution. I think it's just due to the fact that U.S. plays with fire, which is foreign policy as it relates to
Well,
Russia.
sure, but I'm saying that the incel thing is it's going to be like an underlying
I
thing that is
don't
under the
think so
actual thing
because
that's happening.
the incels have no power though. Like that's the thing. They have no kind of power. Manpower doesn't mean much in 2024. It's either you're inside the system or you're not. And incels are not even like they're not even CEOs. They're not even like in the private sector, leading the private sector. Anyone who rises to some kind of through some kind of hierarchy is no longer an incel and is probably doing pretty well with girls. So by default, you have incels being at the bottom of like every kind of hierarchy, government and economic and corporate and whatever. But yeah, I guess we'll see
And that's why sex trafficking is ultimately popular as well, to
for.
fulfill those incels. That's just another theory of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that prostitution would be a lot better than sex trafficking now.
Well, I mean, what's the difference?
Well, I was under the impression that sex trafficking is when you take a girl who's like not interested in being a sex worker and you force her to do it, right?
I get, yeah, that's true. There's coercion there, so it is forced actually.
Versus like voluntary prostitution would be better because like women are volunteering to do it.
So you're saying that we should have that whorehouses should be legal across the
Yeah,
United
absolutely,
States?
100%.
All right, fair enough.
If we do that, there'll probably be at least 10% less mass shootings. My prediction.
10% less.
10% or more. It could be up to 50. I don't know, but it's going to be at least.
And here I thought it was because we require 2.6 incomes to run a family home. That's what I thought it was.
But the mass
enough.
shooters are typically not family men, right? They're only
the,
men.
the lack of that's not necessary. I mean, sure, but like the thing is, is that like if you look at the psychology of someone who is a mass shooter, right, it's no different than that guy that Rolo talks about in book 2 that's lighting himself on fire in Washington D.C. They have a very similar neutral psychological profile. I mean, it's identical actually. So that judgment actually is too narrow, is my point. So
Maybe. Although, if we just look at it like factually, if we look at most like mass shooters, they're typically not married men. It's really rare that you see a married man or even a man that's in like a relationship, right? It's typically usually single men.
But why do they have to be married? Because no one really gives a shit about legal marriage these days in the United States anyway, especially people who are younger than 40. Like, they really don't care.
You and I don't, but I think a lot of people still do.
No, I mean, maybe if they're Gen Xers and Boomers, they care, but 50% of millennials in general, I don't think they care. And then that gets even lower to the point where, like, I'd say in about 1 out of 3 Gen Zers, if I remember correctly, don't really care that much. And then I'm sure Alpha generation's really not going to care. So.
Okay, I'm just looking it up. According to multiple sources, a large percent of Gen Z want to get married at some point in their lives. One number is 80%, another number is 93%, according to Newsweek. Another number is 81%. So it seems like it's somewhere between 80 and 93% the number of Gen Zers that want to get married.
Well, okay. Wanting to get married versus actually getting married or actually staying married is entirely different. So.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I would agree with that. I mean, 50% of marriages end in divorce.
50?
Yeah.
You're saying 50? Isn't that stat like 20 years old? What's the current stat?
I think it's about 50.
Okay.
I'll fact check myself though. Hang on a second. What percent of marriages end in divorce? Okay, let's see. Okay, so here we have 41. It just depends on. Okay, here I see there are 86 divorces. 41%.
Sure, it gets really interesting when you look at individual locales too. I think that'd be
for sure.
Like
no, yeah, it's almost 50%. Yeah, that's the number. Some people. That's not to say those marriages are happy. There's a lot of people who are married who are not happy, but yeah. But anyway, man, I think we covered a lot of shit. Yeah, I definitely would love to have you on again. There's a lot more shit we could explore.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you have anything you want to discuss? Or I know I've asked a lot of questions, but is there anything that's on your mind or whatever?
I think in general we kind of touched on it for the most part. Like I, I mean, if I was going to be a shill, I'd tell people to take my personality test at ucha.app, which is udja.app. But other than that, like, I think we've basically, I think we've covered everything that we probably wanted to discuss. I really enjoy discussing politics with you, though. Actually, I find that very fascinating because, like, I'm not someone who subscribes to the right or left. I'm an individual who just thinks it all needs to burn to the ground, and I don't think it's worth saving. Actually,
So you're like
I think
an anarchist, right?
no, because I have a problem with anarchy as well. Because like, here's the problem. It goes back to Plato's Republic. Okay, so Plato organizes people into four separate groups. Okay, you have guardians, artisans, thinkers, and idealists. And you're on the artisan side. That's where you are. You're in the artisans. And oddly enough, it's actually the artisans that really care the most about anarchy. But basically, it's just gang, tribal living ultimately in the direction. And you've obviously been able to grow throughout your life and kind of get away probably from that thinking and kind of have more of the guardian approach, which is
Yeah, I'm not an anarchist by any stretch. I've seen some
where
ideas.
guardian. So if guardians control society, it turns into or not anarchy, oligarchy. If artisans control society, it turns into anarchy or gang ran or tribal society. If thinkers take over society, and they're like 15% of the population, then it turns into totalitarianism. If idealists take over society, it turns into communism. But the bottom line is that politically, no one can do it right. No one can. So there has to be like some kind of new form of government that actually is able to establish an equilibrium between all four of these groups, according to Plato's Republic, which Plato's Republic actually provides some prescriptions as to how to actually accomplish that. However, the way that we have our republic structured here in the United States of America currently, I do not think it's actually even able to live up to Plato's standards. And even then, I still think Plato's standards ultimately fall short. And perhaps that's something we could discuss in the next show, which I think would be pretty fascinating for everyone. But yeah, like in general, I think there needs to be a massive redo or a severe edit to how things work in the United States of America. I really think so. A
Yeah,
fundamental transformation, to echo the words of Obama, basically.
yeah, you're not wrong. I would, if I could be dictator for a year, I think I could solve a lot of issues. But you need really the main solution would be take money out of politics. But you're not going to convince a bunch of people who make money from lobbyists to stop making money from lobbyists because they're the ones that pass
I
legislation,
think taking money out of politics is very, very important. I
which
entirely
will,
agree with that.
yeah, which will
Although I'm just not
unfortunately
entirely
never
sure how to
happen.
accomplish that.
Well, you would overturn Citizens United. That would be a start, but again, that would be just a start. Um, in terms of where I am, yeah, I mean, like I'm somewhere. I oscillate between being wanting a system that's as close to direct democracy as possible versus a system that's like a more of a republic, representative republic, like we have.
So, what's your thoughts on the 17th Amendment then?
Tell me what the 17th Amendment is again.
The 17th Amendment of the Constitution is basically the right given to the people to determine senators by popular vote instead of state assemblies electing
Oh yeah, no,
senators and
I
sitting there.
like that. I like that. Yeah, I'm not
You
opposed
really
to.
like that. So I don't like that because of the problems relating to the states themselves. The state governments themselves lost their representation within the federal government. I think that's bad because it actually can harm states' rights, which is a really big discussion topic now, especially since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Which, even though I am pro-life, I actually think Roe v. Wade being overturned is a disaster. I think it's an absolute disaster for reasons not relating to abortion. For reasons relating to bodily autonomy. I think the U.S. government is overreaching with its power there because I maintain that without Roe v. Wade, bodily autonomy is not something that is considered an inalienable right by the U.S. federal government at this point. And Roe v. Wade was, in my opinion, the only protection for bodily autonomy. Because without Roe v. Wade, another so-called pandemic could happen, and then we could actually legally perform forced vaccination on the populace against everyone's will. Against everyone's will, literally because of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and that's one of my biggest concerns about Roe v. Wade being overturned. It has nothing to do with abortion; it just has everything to do with bodily autonomy, and I think that's definitely a right that should be appended to the Bill of Rights, in my opinion.
Oh, I
Among
agree.
some
I'm
other
all about
things.
bodily autonomy. Yeah, I mean, we can get into for next time a debate between like because the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, why the Articles of Confederation, which favor states' rights, failed. I mean, that's a whole can of worms that we can open up next time, but that will take forever.
Hey, I mean, we can both reread the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers and just go for it. Like, who knows?
Yeah, why not? We should get Date Psych on for the next one.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah. So you can just find me on YouTube, CS Joseph. It's pretty easy. You could go take our personality test, which just released a new version today, actually, in preparation for this stream.
Oh,
And
cool.
that is at udja.app. And if you guys want to get on our paid membership, that's school.com/CS Joseph, which is SKOOL. So school.com/CS Joseph. You can check that out too. If you want to learn cutting edge psychology to optimize all of your relationships in your life, be it with men, women, whatever, or even in the workplace, we cover it all essentially. And you can actually like learn about your identity, and that way you can be okay with who you are and forgive yourself and love yourself and then understand yourself so that you can actually do that to other people in your life because you're able to do that for yourself because of that awesome meme that we all love. You know too much psychology because you can explain the reason behind why everyone does everything, and therefore you can't ever get mad. So, and that's ultimately the outcome that we deliver to everyone who gets involved in my content. As far as my gender dynamics content, I actually took it down recently and going to be re-releasing it in a different format in the future. So that includes also all of my nonprofit related content as well. So, but it will be coming back as I get into it. But in general, I mean, I see a lot of the concepts in the red pill to be accurate, but as you have surmised, I've adjusted the definitions to suit my own agendas as a result. And then, but then also simultaneously, I really do not like Tomassi's prescriptions. I think pumping and dumping women under plate theory, like handing a young man who doesn't actually know anything about manhood, and in my opinion, he's a man-child, the Rational Male Volume 1 is like literally akin to it's the same thing as adding a loaded gun to a small child. I just think it's ridiculous. And I think men should be properly educated on their own sexual strategy of polygyny and how to have managed polygyny instead of unmanaged polygyny, essentially.
Yeah,
And those are some of the core concepts I teach.
Sorry. Yeah, we can talk about polygyny next time. But yeah, man, thanks so much for coming on. It was a fun discussion. Let's definitely do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Thanks,
yeah,
Alex.
for sure, buddy. All right, man. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys later.